In tonight's story, betrayal runs deep, but revenge runs deeper. You're listening to Revenge with Jack, where justice always finds its way. Graham Whitaker liked to conduct breakfast like a board meeting. He lifted his coffee mug as if it were a gavel and brought it down on my name. "You're worthless trash, Adrian." Steam curled from the rim, bitter and sweet, and I could smell the scorched drip on the warmer. His kitchen was all intention, granite that swallowed light, chrome that showed your fingerprints, a window framing Denver like a trophy shelf. The furnace hummed, steady and indifferent. Lila sat at the end of the island with a plate of eggs she didn't want. She dragged the spoon through yellow, slow circles, as if she could make time thicken and spare us. She didn't look at me. She hadn't looked at me in weeks when her father was in the room. I watched the small muscles in her wrist. How they tightened. How they let go. That was our marriage now. Careful weather passing overhead while the ground cracked. "What is it you do again?" Graham asked, the way people ask a valet if he enjoys driving. "Finance," Lila offered, quiet, almost rehearsed. He scoffed. "Finance means nothing. Could be insurance at a strip mall. Could be someone else's spreadsheets." He paced the oval around the island, each lap turning his face a deeper red. Behind him, on the fridge, were photos from a decade when he smiled more easily. Fishing on Flathead Lake. Lila at a poster session in grad school. A Christmas where the tree was too big for the room. I could have said it then. I could have told him about Northbridge Capital and the shell companies and the trusts that drifted like cloud cover, about how we step into deals before headlines learn their names, how discretion is the only way certain doors open, how power is cleanest when it leaves no trace. Instead, I swallowed it. I let the insult hang between the cabinets like a damp coat. "You sit there like a mute," he said, pointing at my chest. "Real men speak up. Real men defend themselves." I nodded. "You're right, Mr. Whitaker." Silence moved through the room like a draft. Lila's spoon stopped. Graham's eyebrows twitched, unsure whether he'd won or missed something. I stood and slid my jacket from the chair, the fabric whispering against wood. "Lila deserves better," I said. The words were a door I opened, and the cold stepped in. "Adrian," she said, finally looking at me. Her eyes were the soft gray of storm water. "Wait." But the handle was already in my hand, and November was already outside, thin air and a sky that had learned to be hard. I stepped onto the porch, and the quiet hit me, a kind of ringing you only hear after noise. The mountains sat hushed to the west. Somewhere a neighbor's dog barked once and thought better of it. My breath rose and vanished. Inside, a family rehearsed its old play. Out here, the script could change. I knew two things in that blue light. Power had left me the moment I chased approval into his kitchen, and it would return the moment I stopped. I walked down the steps without hurry. The day felt newly written. I met Lila in Boulder, where ideas show up in fleece jackets and carry coffee like a credential. The conference hall smelled of dry erase and citrus cleaner, 1,000 name tags fluttering against 1,000 chests. Lila stood at the lectern with a slide behind her, clean fonts, pale blues, a small helix tucked in the corner like a signature. She talked about gene therapy as if it were a language we could all learn if we listened long enough. No showmanship, just clarity. Her voice had that calm that comes from knowing the data better than the room knows its doubts. I had gone because Northbridge was circling the medical space again. Quietly, always quietly. The usual booths were there, glossy promises, crowded acronyms. But with Lila I heard something different. Not an elevator pitch, not a hunger for capital, but the discipline of someone who respects what she does not control. Risk, she said, should be taken on purpose, never by accident. People nodded. I wrote the sentence down and pretended it was mine. We met between sessions over coffee that tasted like ambition. She laughed with her whole mouth, eyes crinkling in a way that said she still found wonder in the lab after long days. We walked Pearl Street and shared a bag of kettle corn we pretended we didn't want. Snow flurried without commitment. I told her I liked small rooms with big questions. She told me she liked big questions, answered one essay at a time. It felt like compatibility or the start of a thesis. Things quickened. Dinners that turned to drives that turned to mornings where the city opened like a clean page. In photographs from that first year, our shoulders tilt toward each other as if magnetized. 18 months later, we stood in a small garden behind a bookstore, just the two of us and a justice with cold fingers. The wind picked up during our vows and lifted the hem of her dress. We laughed. We meant every word. Graham wanted a ballroom with chandeliers and a seating chart that proved something. He called our ceremony modest, the way some people say unfortunate. I sent him a photograph, the two of us under a maple, red leaves like quiet confetti, and he didn't reply. I told myself it didn't matter. Love, I thought then, is an economy of attention. Invest where returns are real. The first holiday with the Whitakers tasted of rosemary and performance. Country club friends. Wine that introduced itself by price. Compliments shaped like audits. What is it you do again? Someone asked, as if my answer could be graded. Finance, I said, the simplest true word. Graham pressed. What firm? Which fund? What assets under management? I smiled and kept it foggy, the way I always do. Anonymity is how certain work survives. He took my discretion as absence. A seed does not look like a tree. That was my mistake, expecting him to imagine it. Lila watched the back and forth with a tense half-smile, the daughter and the scientist both trying to keep the room from tipping. Later, in the car, she exhaled too long and said, "He's old-fashioned." I nodded. Contempt rarely arrives as a storm. It's a drizzle that finds every gap in the roof. We drove home in silence, the wipers measuring our future in small, even strokes. The first time I realized invisibility could be an instrument, I was 24 and watching a rival bidder walk into a meeting with a press release already drafted. The deal died the second the cameras arrived. Money hates heat. Since then, I've learned to move like fog. There, shaping the world, but hard to grasp. Northbridge Capital is a name on a door most people never find. The work sits behind layered entities, holding companies with names borrowed from obsolete constellations, Delaware LLCs that look like empty rooms, trusts that sleep inside other trusts like nesting dolls. Lawyers call it structure. I call it quiet. People imagine finance as a stadium with ticker tape and applause. Mine is a library. We buy early, when the air is thin and the maps are guesses. We protect founders from the glare long enough for the thing they're making to harden into something that can survive daylight. To do that, we stay unremarkable. My emails are sentences that end in periods. My suits are the color of corners. If you can remember what I wore, I failed. We manage just over 200 million, which sounds like more than it feels when you are allocating it in a world that burns through miracles. I learned to speak with the prudence of someone who has seen good ideas ruined by the wrong kind of attention. I learned to let others take credit and keep the returns. That bargain never bothered me. Power is cleanest when it does not need an audience. Graham lives at the opposite pole. His success has always arrived with a witness. He inherited a construction fortune and repainted it biotech blue, then taught himself to believe that inheritance was instinct. He fills rooms with volume the way some men fill them with competence. His circle likes loud proof. Cars that announce themselves, memberships, a wine list recited like a resume. To them, quiet looks like lack. Graham mistook my privacy for poverty and my tolerance for his monologues as agreement with their terms. It would be comic if it didn't involve the person I loved. 8 months before that November breakfast, I had started following Novadyn's numbers the way you watch a shaky climber on a ridge, not out of malice, but because gravity is patient. Burn rates that outpaced runway. A launch pushed out against the advice of the lab. Debt with impatient covenants. Novadyn wasn't a fraud. It was a company convinced it could out-argue physics. I knew how to help. Convertible preferred with controls, milestone tranching, a board refresh that would put actual scientists back near the wheel. I could be the anonymous hand, the unseen backstop. That had been the plan. Lila never asked how I kept the lights in our world so steady. She liked not worrying. I told myself secrecy was protection, even from her, especially from her father. Maybe that was noble. Maybe it was convenience. The truth is simpler. The less people know, the fewer targets to shoot at when fear arrives. And fear always arrives. Graham looked at me and saw a silence he could bruise. I looked at him and saw a man certain noise could save him. Between those two errors, a marriage tried to live. Lila's birthday fell on a Thursday, the kind of winter evening when Denver wears its lights like jewelry. Graham insisted on hosting. He liked occasions with witnesses. The dining room smelled of thyme and butter and something expensive trying too hard. Place cards waited at each setting, a choreography that put me opposite him, as if he'd rehearsed the angle of attack. Dr. Pierce Adkins arrived late, cheeks red from the cold and the attention. He was the kind of surgeon who told stories with his wrists, flashing a watch that could buy a graduate student's year. Before coats were on chairs, he was describing a 40-foot yacht as if it were a colleague he admired. Sleeps 6, twin diesels, eats the water, he said, tapping the table with pride. The country club talk rose and fell in agreeable waves. I poured Lila a small glass of wine. She pressed her fingers to mine for half a second, a semaphore that read, "Please, not tonight." Dessert came with fire. Candles trembling, cake perfumed with citrus. The chorus of happy dragged a little too long. Pierce leaned across the table and clapped my shoulder. "Any big purchases lately, Adrian? New car? Investment property? You must have something fun up your sleeve." It was an invitation dressed like camaraderie. Graham's eyes sharpened, the way a lens does when it finds its subject. "Adrian doesn't make those kinds of purchases," he said, voice dipped in paternal pity. "He's a practical man." He let the word practical sit on the linen like a stain. Lila's hand went slack in mine under the tablecloth, a tiny surrender. Forks paused. Someone coughed. In that suspended second, I watched the room choose comfort over courage. The truth is, humiliation is rarely loud. It is a quiet redistribution of weight in your chest. It is noticing how people avoid your face to keep the evening smooth. It is counting how many times your wife has not said your name when it mattered. I looked at Lila, really looked, and saw a careful daughter trying to keep two worlds from colliding. I also saw the scientist who once spoke about risk taken on purpose. How easily we break our own rules when love is in the room. I could have matched Graham's volume, listed assets, named companies, turned the table into a ledger that proved my worth in numbers. But victory by disclosure would have cost me the only currency I value, the choice to stay unseen. Silence is not emptiness, it is a decision. I set my fork down. I folded my napkin with the same care I use when signing term sheets. I stood. "You're absolutely right," I said, meeting his eyes without heat. "She does deserve better." I bent and kissed Lila's hair, which smelled faintly of orange peel and lab soap, the scent of the life she'd built before me. "I'll call you tomorrow," I whispered, and I meant it, though not about what she thought. Coates whispered in the foyer. The door opened on a night so clear the stars looked like cold facts. I stepped into it and felt something precise click into place, the kind of click you hear when a safe opens, or when you finally stop asking the wrong person to understand you. The night after the candles and the pity, I drove home on streets that knew my tires by heart. Denver glittered at the margins, hospital windows and office towers pulsing like distant cursors. In the garage, I sat with the engine off until the heat thinned and the dashboard clock looked like a metronome for decisions already made. Some choices feel like anger. This one felt like hygiene. At 7:12 a.m., I called Daniel Shore. He answers like he's already reading whatever you're about to need. 3 documents, I said. A formal withdrawal of interest from Novadyn Labs, a termination of all pending agreements, and a confidentiality release allowing me, at my discretion, to identify myself as the anonymous investor heretofore referenced. He didn't clear his throat or ask why. Lawyers who last learn to hear the weather, not the gossip. "Delivery?" he asked. 10 o'clock, I said. "Tomorrow. Hand to counsel, receipt logged. No leaks before then." A pause. "Adrian, you're certain?" I looked at the square of winter light on my office floor. Certain. Northbridge's files were organized the way my father stacked firewood. Tight, dry, no showy pieces. I opened the Novadyn folder and let the numbers speak in their spare, dispassionate voice. Burn rate, Covenant Cliffs, a launch that had tried to outrun chemistry. The $15 million we'd prepped was not charity. It was a bridge with tolls, tranche milestones, board correction, contingencies to keep the science in control of its own future. It could have saved them. It could also have taught all the wrong lessons. I thought about ethics the way I always do, quietly, without the theater. What do we owe the people who mistake our restraint for weakness? What do we owe the workers inside a broken structure built by someone else's pride? The calculus is never pure. Capital is both medicine and weapon. But there is also this. I would not let my money make Graham louder. I would not reward a reflex that punished truth and worshipped spectacle. Consequences are teachers. Some students only hear them when they are broke. At noon, the drafts arrived from Daniel. Precise, bone clean, the commas behaving themselves. I read every line. initialed where ritual demanded, signed where meaning lived. The release clause felt like a spare key I might never use. I set delivery for exactly 10 a.m. and asked Daniel to schedule a follow-up notice at 10:05 confirming receipt. Panic, properly timed, is an X-ray. It shows you the bones of a man. Then I opened my messages and wrote 2 texts I would schedule for the same minute. One for Lila, simple, unornamented truth. One for Graham, 3 sentences that would fit inside his pride and rattle it from within. I did not rehearse outcomes. I set the timer and closed the phone with the relief of a door latched at last. That night, I worked late, alone with the hum of the server closet and the soft tick of a radiator choosing when to speak. Somewhere past 11, I stood at the window and watched a single plane lift into the dark. Quiet, necessary, carrying people who had made plans. I thought about how many lives are improved by noise and how many are saved by silence. She came back a little after 8, the way winter comes back to a city that thought it had seen the last of it, softly, without apology. The house smelled faintly of cedar from the diffuser Lila liked, and of the tea I never finished. She set her keys in the bowl by the door like a careful confession and sat opposite me in the living room. Choosing the chair she always chose when she needed distance. Her coat stayed on. That said more than the words that followed. "We should have dinner with him," she began, smoothing a thread on the sleeve. "Just the 3 of us. He thinks he went too far." Her voice curled around the phrase as if it might splinter. "He wants to apologize." Wind pressed the windows. Somewhere on the block, a garage door side shut and held. I watched Lila's hands. The hands that steadied pipettes, that folded small happinesses into Tupperware, that had learned my shoulders shape at midnight. "Okay," I said, and waited for truth to arrive behind the proposal, the way a second wave follows the first. She didn't look at me when she asked, "Can we just start over?" There are questions so large they don't sound like questions at all. I felt the room tip, the past on one side, the future on the other, and us in the middle like a glass set too close to the edge. "Lila," I said, and I kept my voice even because love deserves that. "How long have you been ashamed of me?" She flinched. "People do when you name the thing they've been circling." "I'm not ashamed," she said quickly. I hate conflict. He gets so angry when." "So you chose his comfort over my dignity," I said, not as a verdict, but as a measurement. The words did not echo. They simply sat between us like a piece of furniture we could no longer walk around. Tears gathered and didn't fall. She tucked hair behind her ear in that precise movement I'd watched 1,000 times. "He's my father," she said, as if the sentence explained the geometry. "And you're my husband," I answered, as if it could change it. We looked at each other like strangers in a museum, both standing before a painting we could not agree to see the same way. She tried again. "If you tell him what you do, he'll stop. He'll respect you." I shook my head. "I don't want his respect as payment for disclosure. I want it because he sees me. Because you do. Silence is a teacher. It taught us then. You can love someone and still choose a smaller truth because the larger one asks you to risk your place at a familiar table." She stood, paced once, sat again. "I love you," she said, and the sentence, which had always opened doors, found this one locked. "I know," I said, "but love without a defense is only decoration." She cried then, quiet, clean tears that left the room more honest. We did not shout. We did not bargain. We divided our lives with the same care we once used to combine them. What goes with whom? Who keeps the blue bowls? Which books return to which prior selves? When she left an hour later, the cedar still hung in the air, faint and pretty, the way a story hangs after its ending. The door clicked. The house listened to its new shape. I sat until the radiator exhaled and stopped. Some endings look like restraint. Some mercies do too. Morning arrived like a clean ledger. I woke before the alarm and let the dark finish its last sentence. At the office, the coffee tasted the way decisions do after they've set, plain, unornamented, steady. I checked the time twice though I didn't need to. 10 o'clock had been living in my body since I scheduled the messages. Daniel's courier was already downtown, envelope signed for, somebody at Novadyn checking a clock, not yet knowing which second would crack. At 9:45, I called Lila. She answered on the second ring, breath quick, the way you pick up when your life has been pacing. "Adrian, is everything okay?" "I need to tell you something important," I said, and swiveled my chair so I faced the window, as if the view could hold what her voice was about to let go. Sit down. You're scaring me. I'm the anonymous investor, I said. The one your father's been courting. Northbridge was prepared to wire $15 million to Novadyn. Yesterday I withdrew. Silence. Not the brittle kind. The kind that absorbs you. I could hear the small things, the catch of her breath, a bird somewhere testing the morning, the soft scrape of a chair leg on wood. That's not. What are you talking about? You do portfolio management. You don't. Adrian, $15 million? I own Northbridge, Lila. We manage just over $200 million. I kept it quiet because quiet keeps the work alive. I let the facts arrive without decoration. You'll get a text in 12 minutes confirming what I've said. Your father will too. This is cruel, she whispered, not finding anger yet, only vertigo. If you have that kind of money, why didn't you tell me? Why did I stand there all those dinners? Because I didn't need you to know, I said, and then felt the bluntness of it. Because secrecy is part of the work. And because I wanted to see who I was to your family when there was nothing to perform around. So it was a test. No, I said. It was an investment until your father called me worthless in front of you, and you chose to let it stand. Her inhale broke into little pieces. He was wrong. I know that. I should have stopped him. The words scattered, then gathered. But Adrian, this is his company. People work there. There are families. I know, I said softly. And if the company fails, it won't be because I didn't save it. It will be because he kept outrunning the truth and finally tripped. Please. The word was small and enormous at once. If you reverse this, I'll make him apologize. I'll stand up. An apology bought with money isn't an apology, I said. It's a receipt. We both listened to the minute that followed, how it stretched and then tightened. At exactly 10, our phones buzzed. Hers there, mine here. The confirmations arrived with the indifference of machines. She read. I read. Somewhere, Graham read too. Oh my God, she said, so quietly it felt like a prayer that had lost its address. I'm not destroying him, I said. I'm letting him meet himself without my money in the room. She didn't answer. The line didn't click or cry. It just held until she hung up, and the office returned to its small sounds. The fan in the corner, the radiator's careful breath, while a clock on the wall did what clocks always do. Move everything forward whether we're ready or not. The first call after 10 belonged to Graham. It came in like a siren, his name flashing across the screen as if my phone were a dashboard. I let it ring once, twice, then answered. He didn't start with hello. You son of. The rest arrived in pieces, the way anger chews through its own vowels. You think this is funny? You think you can blow up my company because your feelings got bruised at dinner? I looked at the window. The sky was a clean, wintered blue. Mr. Whitaker, I said, as if we were two men in a meeting and not two people standing in a room on fire. I think you've misunderstood the situation. I've misunderstood nothing, he snapped. Oh, Lila told me everything. You were the investor. You pulled out. After we negotiated in good faith. After you blindsided us. We had a preliminary term sheet, I said. I chose not to sign. Nothing illegal. Nothing breached. You still have your company. What happens next is between you and your numbers. Silence then, the kind that happens when a door you were going to kick turns out to be a mirror. He tried again, choosing a different register, a smaller one. 23 people work here, he said. 23 families. You're willing to let them pay because you and I don't get along. I'm willing to let the company succeed or fail on its merits, I said, without my capital masking its problems. I pictured the line items I'd memorized, the covenants fraying, the launch that ignored chemistry, the runway already half-eaten by promises. Money doesn't cure arrogance. It fattens it. He inhaled sharply, a wounded sound, then pushed into bargaining. What do you want, he asked. A board seat? A public apology? A larger equity position? Tell me the price. There isn't one, I said. I don't want anything from you. Everyone wants something. I want you to understand what it feels like to need someone you consider worthless, I said, the words even, almost quiet. That's all. For a second, I thought he might laugh, the old performance winding up to spin the moment into farce. But no sound came. Somewhere on his end, a chair creaked. On mine, the radiator ticked once. I could see him then, not as the man who curated rooms to prove himself, but as a person naked to the arithmetic he'd delayed. Pride looks like confidence until the math refuses to move. "You're making a mistake," he said finally, an old line reaching for new power. "People talk. This will get around." "It already has," I said. "Just not the way you think." He tried my name once, Adrian, as if saying it could change the geometry. It didn't. I told him I had nothing else to add. He began to speak again, but I was done mistaking volume for gravity. I said goodbye, not unkindly, and ended the call. Then I powered the phone down. Not to be dramatic, just to choose silence over the echo. The office returned to its small, faithful noises. A fan with a minor wobble, paper settling in a tray, the building's bones adjusting to winter. Outside, a siren passed and kept going, searching for someone else's emergency. For the first time in a long time, I felt the day fit. Like a suit no longer borrowed. 3 days is the time it takes for shock to set into bone. On the third morning, a courier envelope beat me home. Inside, Lila's petition, the language arid and perfectly spelled. No theatrics. Irreconcilable differences printed as if differences were ever anything, but people who couldn't hold the same weather anymore. She packed while I was at the office, left the blue bowls, took the kettle we bought in Boulder, slid a folded letter under the magnet that used to hold grocery lists. 2 pages, careful script, the voice of a scientist labeling samples. I read it standing up. She wrote that she couldn't stay with someone who would deliberately harm her family. She didn't write that she'd called her father and finally said the things she'd stored for years. I learned that from Dr. Naomi Park, who still hears the industry before the industry hears itself. She told him about the launch. Naomi said over a coffee we didn't sweeten. Told him she warned him. Told him what it was like to be erased. He tried to spin. She didn't let him. In my head I could see it. Lila's voice steady. The way it used to be at the lectern in Boulder. Graham reaching for the old levers of charm and decibel. Those levers air now. She hung up. He called back 17 times. She let the phone become a metronome she did not obey. By the end of the week, Novadyn's phones rang for different reasons. One investor paused due diligence. Then another. Momentum is a currency. Once you spend it, the bill arrives in clusters. The local business journal ran a piece with a headline that knew how to draw blood without showing the knife. Leadership concerns, anonymous sources, the word tumult, doing work it enjoys. Former staff spoke about a culture that sped when it should have paused. No one named me. The article didn't need to. Graham did what men like him do when the room tilts. Sold the visible. The country club membership went first, then the ski place in Vale, or Vale, as he preferred to pronounce it, as if the word owed him a vowel. The Porsche that idled on Sundays. A watch that had been a rehearsal for permanence. Inside Novadyn, HR delivered manila envelopes, 8 of them, while the lab lights hummed as if nothing had changed. They shuttered the satellite facility out by the highway, the one with the glass that always looked cold. 23 employees became 15, then 13. People carried desk plants to cars that already smelled like resigned futures. I drove past the Whitaker house one afternoon because habit is a hard teacher. Graham was in the yard pulling weeds that used to be negotiated away by a landscaping crew. He wore a ball cap low, as if the brim could argue with daylight. He didn't see me. I didn't stop. There are thresholds you cross only once if you want to stay crossed. Nights, my phone stayed quiet except for industry chatter that reads like weather reports. Hearing Novadyn's runway is weeks, not months. Covenants tripping. Bridge financing discussed, then ghosted. I answered none of it. Silence is not abandonment. Sometimes it is the only honest witness. In the dark, I thought about Lila in a sublet with good light, her research notes unpacked, her name returning to programs and panels. I hoped she slept. I hoped she stopped apologizing to rooms that didn't deserve her caution. Consequences move slower than rumors and land harder. You can hear them when they arrive. It sounds like a door closing in a building you no longer enter. 6 months reshaped the map. Novadyn filed in a courthouse with fluorescent lights that flattened everyone into paperwork. The assets were cataloged into listings that read like polite obituaries. Patents parceled, benches sold, the coffee machine priced as if endurance could be appraised. Some employees were absorbed by the acquirer, their email signatures changing like borrowed coats. Others packed lab notebooks into bankers' boxes and went home early to explain to children why tomorrow would look different. The industry did what it always does, folded the story into a paragraph and moved on. Graham didn't. He took a consultancy in a strip mall near the airport, the kind of office with carpets that remember other companies' shoes. A frosted glass door, a rented fern, a desk that looked like an apology. I heard he wore a tie every day as if fabric could rebuild a life by degrees. Men who once shook his hand to be seen now checked their watches. Reputation is compound interest too, built slowly, ruined at speed. I sold the house. Denver receded into a clean set of keys I no longer owned. Portland greeted me with rain that spoke in patience and pines that understood long projects. I opened a Northbridge office above a bakery that made mornings smell like the planet forgave us. My team settled into a rhythm. Early diligence, quiet bets, founders who want light without the circus. The work felt like breathing again. Lala did not call. I didn't either. We became factual to one another. Through Naomi, I learned she joined a research institute in California, a place where the grant proposals hum with purpose and the microscopes are new enough to make hope feel justified. Her name returned to conference programs. She wrote papers with titles that wouldn't fit on a mug. In a photo someone forwarded, she stands in a lab coat with her hair up, jaw set, eyes bright. The same posture she had in Boulder when conviction lived in her voice. I hope she forgives herself for the years she kept quiet. I hope I forgive myself for asking quiet to do what courage should have. Sometimes I drive the river roads at dusk and think about how power behaves. It can dazzle and coerce, or it can hold its shape and wait for character to declare itself. What happened to Graham wasn't my revenge as much as his rendezvous, with his choices, with the data he refused, with the people he mistook for furniture. Money could have disguised all that another year. I withdrew the costume. The stage did the rest. There's a particular mercy in restraint. You don't slam the door. You leave it unlocked and let a man walk out of his house carrying only what will carry him back. Some weights are chosen. Some are taught. In the end, the quiet did the work I trusted it to do. I don't need an audience for that. I needed the air to be clear when I breathed. If you ask me now what I do, I'll still say finance. It's enough. Those who need the footnotes already know where to find them.